Hello, hello, benefit sponges, and welcome to this week's update video. I'm drinking tea, and just so you don't get annoyed, a lot of people got very frustrated by me going to drink tea and never drinking tea. I'm going to begin by drinking some tea. Ah, lovely. Yes, all going all right today. Well, that's kind of half truth. Had a terrible morning. I was trying to make an omelette, kept firing butter all over the place and dropping eggs. It was just a disaster. You know, that kind of day where you just think, I've got to go to bed again. Just isn't going to work. But I've battled through, and this morning I recorded my XCOM episode for this week, which is going up tomorrow. It's a good one this week. Not going to say any more than that, but I think it's a good one. Things didn't necessarily go well, but yeah, I think I'll enjoy that. And also, I've just this minute, finished Bravely Default on 3DS, which is it's good. I mean, obviously, it's a Japanese RPG, which means I've kind of like had that intense build-up of grinding and doing all this stuff for no apparent reason, and then getting to the final boss and killing them really quickly and feeling this immense sense of emptiness in the fact that I've just been like, oh, that was it. It's over now. Why did I spend 5 hours preparing for that when I didn't need to? But hey, I think JRPGs are fascinating. I think as a formula, they need to be reinvented, though. And I think it's interesting in the fact that Bravely Default fixes a lot of the stuff that's wrong with JRPGs, but it's still very much locked in that old school formula. And I find them fascinating in the fact that you get to an end of a JRPG and you get this immense sense of emptiness. I find after I've finished it, I go, oh, that's it. I don't know how to get around that. I think they just need to be better paced. And also, in exciting news, look what I got in the post. Yeah, filled with fun. I spent ages trying to find my copy of Viva Pinata for the 360, and I don't know where it is. I think I must have lent it to somebody. Because, I do want to make a video about Viva Pinata at some point soon. I'm aware loads of stuff keeps getting pushed back, because I keep having things I want to do, but then things happen. Obviously, the Oculus Rift thing happened this week, and I wanted to say a few things about that because I think it's interesting. But also, I want to make a stupid video about it because I like making stupid videos. So if you haven't seen those, go and bloody watch them. Also, of course, Game of Thrones stuff continues. I'm quite happy with the one I did this week for The Escapist. It involves lots of singing songs. I'm kind of trying to take it a bit less seriously. The community don't like the fact that it's very silly and childish, but now I just sort of think, well, it doesn't really matter. So I'm just kind of going all out and spending less time with the attention to detail and trying to account for all the characters, and more time just having a bit of fun with it. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. You might quite enjoy it. Yeah, apart from that, the big news this week, and what I've been doing a lot of this week, is podcast-related things. So now, this, you may be listening to it already, in fact, but this is now available as a podcast on SoundCloud, of course, but it's also a proper podcast, which means you can subscribe to it on iTunes and you can subscribe to it RSS. I will put links for both of those things in this in the description for this video, so you can subscribe to it. Which means if you don't have time to sit and watch the videos, which is reasonable, you can just subscribe to this as an audio podcast. Yeah, and the other news, of course, is that Daft Souls, a brand new gaming podcast with me and a bunch of other people, now has 2 new people. We have Keza McDonald, who's a fantastically passionate writer / video person. She's now the new new editor of Kotaku UK. She's great though. She's funny and incredibly passionate about games. I think she'll be great to have on the podcast. And also Aoife Wilson, who is equally very passionate about games, very knowledgeable, has a lot of interesting things to say about them, and has a lovely voice as well, which is always good for podcasts. So yeah, I'm really excited about that, because actually a few people had mentioned to me when I started the podcast, a few people had said, oh, there aren't any girls on this podcast. And I was like, yeah, no, there aren't. And that was something I hadn't really thought about, because the way I'd gone about creating the podcast was to ask people who I knew, basically, and say, will you do me a favor? Will you be on this podcast? And being aware that they were taking up their time to come and do something which was fundamentally my project, I kind of felt a bit cheeky. So I only really asked people who were very good friends of mine, who I knew would do me the favor, basically. And in exchange, they come over and I'll make them dinner and I'll give them a beer. And, it's because people are going out of their way to do it. And podcast is fun, but still, when you're dealing with professionals, and I want to have professionals as part of it, because I think, they're professional for a reason. They're good. People do have limited time, and people you are asking a lot. People have a lot of commitments. But anyway, I thought about that, and a few people had said, oh, it's a shame that it isn't a bit more of a inclusive lineup in terms of having a more diverse number of voices. And I thought there was some truth to that, yeah. I mean, a lot of people actually, when I tweeted about that, a lot of people said, no, you shouldn't feel the need to make things more inclusive for no reason. And it's like, well, it's not that really. I think a lot of people got the wrong end of the stick when I was talking about how it was purely a case of I'm not that good friends. I'm not best friends with that many women within the games industry. And that was all it was, really. But I think it's wrong. I mean, I don't think you should make things... I don't think you should always try and make something appeal to everyone, but I think being more diverse is never a bad thing. I think if you're putting diversity above anything else, then that's a problem. But I don't think there's any issue with that, and I think it's actually I'm really looking forward to it because I think it is important. I mean, the games industry is already too much of a sausage fest, and so I'm really actually glad to be getting a couple of girls involved as well, just because hopefully that will just add something else. And they won't be there every week. Not everyone will. I mean, the only constant in the podcast is going to be me, and that's mainly a logistical thing as well. It means I'm the person who's basically editing it, and I'm the person who has the studio, which is where I'm sitting now, but with more people. So that just makes sense. But yeah, I think it should be really great. I think if it had been the case where if I kind of wanted to include some women in the podcast and I couldn't think of any women who were going to be right for the tone of the podcast I want to make, then I wouldn't have done it. And I also think that a lot of people said to me, well, you can have guests Skyping in. And that's another thing is that I don't want to do that. I don't want to use Skype for the podcast at all. I want it all to be in the same room. And that's just because it's what I'm going for. And it's the same reason that a lot of people ask me if we're going to video it. No, not going to video it. Sorry. Not going to video it because I feel that videoed podcasts have a different feel. If you feel like you're being watched and being recorded, then you feel like you're always performing to an audience. Rather than having a conversation with people. And that's not a slight on podcasts that do it. I've been on a lot of modern YouTube podcasts where you are actually talking to other people via Skype and via cameras, and you all have a little camera in front of you. But it's a different feel. You feel like you're always being watched. You feel like you always have a degree of performing. Whereas the podcasts that I like are the ones where you feel like you're eavesdropping on a conversation. And I think the only way to get that is to actually create real conversations, which requires intelligent, funny, interesting people sitting together, not being filmed, just being recorded while they have a conversation. And I think that's where so that's what I'm doing. But you've probably already worked that one out. But anyway, I'm very excited by that. And if you haven't done so already, you should subscribe on the iTunes. But yeah, a lot of my week's been taken up with admin, doing RSS feeds. And it wouldn't be a Benefit Sponger Q&A update video if I didn't spill tea on my knob. So I just spilled some tea on my knob. God, I gotta stop doing that. Anyway, without further ado, let's do some questions. So first one, I didn't ask this one because it's a big question. And it's a question that a lot of people ask, so I'll just get this one out of the way. Lewis Jones says, basically as a student, he wants to be an aspiring writer/journalist in the games industry. What's the best advice you can give to somebody who wants to get into the games industry? Now, I get asked this a lot, and the only answer I can give is don't. Which sounds bad. It sounds like I'm saying, no, don't do it. Don't do what I'm doing. But don't be an aspiring games journalist because you will have a horrible time. The only advice I can give you is that if you want to write about games or you want to be a sort of journalist or you want to make videos about games, just do it. Don't ever treat it as a potential career path because it's so competitive and it's so difficult to get anywhere within it that if you try and set that as your target, you will have a really hard time. And it's very difficult to make any money. And it's very difficult to make any money. And even when you're making money, it's very difficult to make anything other than pennies, really. So the only advice I can give to people is basically the only way you will ever actually cut it. And everyone I know who is a great games writer or a games journalist, all those people have the same thing in common in the fact that they were doing it before they got paid to do it, and they were doing it because they love doing it, and they still do it because they love doing it. A lot of people want to work in games because they like the idea of being able to play games, but the big secret about most people who work as games journalists is they don't play many games. I haven't played any games this week, I don't think. I played a bit of XCOM for the video, that's it. Literally, I haven't played any other games. I think I played one game of Dota. I'm really excited about playing some Dark Souls 2 after I finish this video because I haven't played Dark Souls 2 for a week. And it's like, it's mental. I get paid to play games, apparently, but I don't have time. So I think that basically the people who end up doing this are the people who love doing it because they love creating things. They either love writing or they love making videos or they love entertaining people or informing people. And I think if you don't have that love, if it's not something that you would be doing anyway because you love doing it, then you'll never make it. And that's just the hard line of it, because effectively you might have to do it for years for free before you get good enough to get paid for it. And just generally speaking, if you keep doing it and you have talent, then you will get good enough and you will get paid for it. And I believe that. But if you aim as a career, there's no real steps you can take. All you can do is just keep doing it and be good. The only piece of advice I would give people is that a lot of the time people, when they feel like they want to do it as a job, they feel like they have to do it in a way that is consistent with the rest of the industry and the way that the industry functions. So it means if they're a YouTuber or want to be YouTuber, they'll make little Let's Play videos, or and if they want to be a writer, then they'll write reviews or they'll write think piece features. And basically, there's a lot of a tendency for people to try and behave like they think they should, because that's how the industry functions. Whereas now it's all about being disruptive. It's all about trying to think of things that people aren't doing. And a lot of people who I see who are not currently working within the industry, but I think may well be working within the industry next couple of years, maybe, if they keep doing it and they keep doing well, are the people who are doing interesting things, who are creating new ideas and new formats and new one-off things. So I think that why restrict yourself? Basically, the people who work full-time within the industry don't have any option. They have to make reviews and previews because that's their job. That's what they have to do. They have the inflexibility that you don't have. So if you're not working in the industry, you have no rules to abide to. And abiding to the rules that the other people already abide to isn't going to help you, because actually, what you need to do if you want to work with industry is get the attention of people who are within the industry. And often the best way to do that is by doing something amazing that they wish they could do. But you've got to be creative, you've got to be driven, and you've got to be good. You do have to be good. But the only way to be good is to keep doing it. And actually, before I got my first job, I did a daily blogging thing called One a Day, which was basically, I think it was Andy Kelly who started it all up. And he was like, he realized that he'd been writing for games magazines for about 6-7 years, and he'd just been writing professionally. And he wanted to start writing for pleasure and just writing for the sake of enjoying it, to remember that again. So he started writing about all sorts of stuff. But the idea was you had to write something every day. You had to write a blog entry every day. And I started doing that as well. And I took it really seriously. And I needed to make sure that, A, I didn't drop it. I did something every single day. And B, I did something every single day that would be good. I didn't want to ever do anything that felt like a cop-out, Didn't want to do a blog entry going, well, today I've been doing this. So it was a real challenge trying to think about what to write about. And these are all still there, actually. If you go to my Tumblr, which is, I think, jamsponge.tumblr, if you search for Jamsponge Tumblr, you'll find it. Or there's a link on my website, I think. I need to update mattlees.com really badly. It's really old, but yeah. It's all there back in the archive. But basically, I just had to try and write something every day, and it got really stressful. But having that thing of trying to write something of a high quality every day, and something that was interesting, was a real challenge. But it got me noticed because I actually wrote a couple of really good things. And people within the games industry, even though I wasn't writing about games, people in the games industry who were writers started to go, oh, actually, this is quite good. And it got shared around a little bit. And I was a PR at the time, but then people were like, oh, this guy, because people knew I was a good PR. I was friendly and stuff, and people knew me vaguely. But then everyone was like, oh, this guy can write as well. And that's how I got my job. But yeah, I think if I'd actually ever intended to try and be a games journalist, I would have gone insane. I think it's more the fact that I realized that there was an opportunity to do it. I didn't ever expect there to be, but then I realized that I'd kind of managed to maneuver myself into a position where if I really worked hard and focused, I could actually maybe have a crack at doing it as a job. But the only way you can really have that possibility is by just practicing getting good. I mean, there's no such thing as luck in life. It's just hard work. It's being in the right place at the right time with the right experience. So luck is there to a degree, but it's not a case of we all roll the dice once and some people do better than others. I've kind of found myself in some good positions over the past couple of years, and I've got to do some amazing stuff. But I honestly believe that while there is a degree of luck involved, it's more to do with the fact that I throw the dice a lot. You know, I'm busy, I work a lot on a lot of different things, and I just keep throwing the dice. And sometimes you keep getting ones, but if you keep throwing the dice, then eventually something good will happen. Anyway, that's a long answer, but it's quite an important one, I guess. Just do it. If you love it, do it. A lot of people say, "Oh, I'd love to do that as a job." It's like, well, then do it. Like, do it as a hobby. And people will say to you, "Why are you doing that for nothing?" And in 5 years' time, when you've got a job, you can explain why. Anyway. Okay, this is an interesting question from a man called Juiced Ziff, which I don't think it's his real name. If it is, though, you've got the best fucking name in the world. His question is to do with the notion of immersiveness in games and whether or not that's something that games should strive for, and whether or not he thinks it's a pipe dream, that immersiveness is not a thing that we can work, and we can't change the way the brain circuitry works, and we're always going to see the cracks in a developer's creation. And he thinks it might be more viable and more interesting to focus on games which kind of revel in their fakeness, like the Stanley Parable, and games sort of purposefully being fake rather than real. And yes, that's an interesting question. I don't necessarily agree with it. I think you can do some really interesting stuff by being fake and subversive and all that stuff, but I think that immersiveness is not related to smooth experiences necessarily. It's not related to graphical fidelity. I think it's about suspension of disbelief. Obviously, I think just like when you're watching a crappy sci-fi TV show, you can kind of stop and go, "Well, that's not real. That's not a real alien," you know. But you don't, because you just sort of go along with it. And I think that immersion is very much real and it's very much attainable. But I don't think it's necessarily to do with everything being smooth. I think sometimes you just have games where the atmosphere is right. And actually, as I talked in last week's video, a lot of that comes down to the audio design. Some of the most immersive games I've played in recent years have been actually quite lo-fi. I found myself incredibly immersed in, what's it bloody called? It's like a top-down roguelike. It's like a cross between Doom and System Shock, but it's like shooty and I've forgotten the bloody name. This is going to drive me insane, actually. I'm just going to do a cheeky Google while I'm here. Teleglitch. Teleglitch is the name of that game. What a game. Great game. But that was incredibly immersive, really frightening. But just that sensation of being in a place and feeling very uneasy or excited or whatever. I think lots of games I've played have done that. But it's a magical art, and I think sometimes some of the games I've played where I feel truly immersed are incredibly shonky. Like, I still think games like Shadow of the Colossus have an incredibly immersive feel, a real sense of place that takes you somewhere. So no, I don't think it's something that people should give up on. I think it's something worth fighting for. He starts this off by saying, "I remember with my BioShock Infinite video, most of the criticism I had leveled to do with breaking immersion," and that's true. I think BioShock Infinite was one of the least immersive games I've ever played. It was a beautiful world that I wanted to feel like I was in, but it constantly kept doing things that pulled me out of it. I think it was a mess. And it's quite interesting, actually, because recent things that have come out about the production of BioShock Infinite and people like from within Irrational talking about it sounds like the development of that game was a mess. So actually, I'm kind of glad that I was one of the people who sort of went, "Guys, is it just me that was this game like a bit messy?" I mean, it wasn't a terrible game, but it's like there was a lot of stuff that was really wrong with it from a mechanical perspective. You know, it's just really odd decisions. It felt very shonky. Anyway, Matthew Metcalf asks, "What's my opinion on sports games?" I find them really boring. Yeah. That's kind of it, really. I think it's similar to, he talks here about how I talk a lot about MMOs and shooters, but I never really talk about stuff like FIFA and Gran Turismo and Drive Club. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not very good at them. I kind of like racing games. I loved Burnout Paradise is one of my favorite games ever. And actually, I've got a real soft spot for Forza. I spent a summer just playing Forza a lot and got really into tweaking all the bits of the cars and getting them to handle just right, which is bizarre because I don't know anything about cars. I don't drive. I don't care about cars. So that got under my skin. I think it might have been the first Forza. It was either 1 or 2, but I got really into that. Other than that, sports games, I don't play sports, so I'm not really interested in them. And I find that I think maybe you've got to have a kind of an appreciation of sports to enjoy sports games. Because to me, like video games, competitive video games are all like sports in a way, but they're more interesting. You know, like football is kind of restricted by the laws of physics and reality, and the fact that it has to be some men kicking a ball around. Whereas like I play Dota, where you can like make people explode or teleport around the map, and you can do all sorts of amazing stuff. So I kind of think that I never really get into it because I never really got into sports. And one of the reasons I'm so into video games is because I never really liked team sports when I was at school, so I just played lots of video games. And I think a lot of gamers of my generation like that. I think not so much these days, but that's kind of how it panned out. Conan Hutchins asks what my thoughts are on Tash Kalar. I've no idea what Tash Kalar is, but I think it's a board game because he says he loved the shit up and Sata. Tea time. Didn't get any on my knob that time. Brilliant. Yeah, I think it's a board game. But yes, I don't understand there's an in-joke in there about the Vladar Church. No idea what it means, but board games, hooray, they're good. Played a great one this week about the Great Fire of London. I think we recorded it for a Shut Up and Sit Down Let's Play that Quinton's going to work on. No, we didn't. No, that's not true. We played it for review. We recorded a Let's Play of Wiz War, which was insane. I punched Brendan to death. If you don't watch Shut Up and Sit Down, this is going to be very confusing, so I'll carry on. Johan Eriksson, do you think QuickTime events are ever a good thing? Do you prefer a cutscene to a cinematic QTE? Okay. Interesting. I don't know. I'm really confused by QTEs generally because on paper, I hate them. But I don't because I've played games where they've had them in and I've really liked them. Like Resident Evil 4 managed it, right? Like I like the quick QTEs in Resident Evil 4. I mean, maybe that's just because my immense fondness for Resident Evil 4 knows no bounds and bleeds out into reality in ways it shouldn't. But yeah, I loved it. So, But then again, most games I play them in, most games that have them now, I freak out. I just go, oh, get the fuck out. I hate them. And most people do, but I think it's because they've been abused, you know? I think the interesting thing about what they did in Resident Evil 4 was they were always kind of part of a cinematic in a degree of like something would happen, you'd be chased by a boulder, you'd have to do it. There were times where you had to do them like during fights, but usually it was like a part of either a finisher move or a kind of combo reaction. And actually in that degree it kind of worked because it meant that largely the QTE stuff was adding mechanics to Resident Evil 4 that weren't there, because the mechanics were quite simple. You had your shooting, you had a few moves you could do in terms of melee, but then it added context-specific stuff that you could do in fights. So it kind of like you didn't need to have buttons or move combinations to do that because you only need to do it a handful of times. So that kind of got around that problem of being like, well, we don't need to create an extended move set. We just have these special moves that are triggered by this button combination, and then we'll tell them when to do it, which in a way just makes sense because it's like, that's fair. Otherwise, you're just going to be like, how am I supposed to do this? And also gets around the problem of having like move sets that are too complex and people not knowing how to do stuff because they missed it in the tutorial or skipped the tutorial. But largely, I think QTEs are evil. And having said that, even though I didn't mind them in Resi 4, one of my favourite features about the Witcher 2, which I still need to play more of, see, don't play games, is the way that you could choose to have the QTEs in the cutscenes. You can basically go, do you want QTE cutscenes, yes or no? And if you don't, you just go no. And that means that you can just sit back and watch the cutscenes and enjoy them without having to hold a pad or sit with your hands on the keyboard and go, But then the Witcher 2 thing, I'm kind of in two minds in the fact that I love the way that I could switch the QTEs off, and I did, because then it meant that I could just enjoy the cutscenes and not have to hold my pad worrying. But at the same time, I do actually love it when you fail QTEs. It's that horrible duality of I don't want to fail the QTEs because it means I don't have to do it again, which is annoying. But there's something really satisfying about games where you get to see your character die in a really brutal way. And especially because actually The Witcher 2 is quite similar to Resident Evil 4 in the fact that when you do fuck up, like there's a bit right at the start of Witcher 2 where you potentially get eaten by a dragon, and it's just like, oh, it's horrible. It's just like, oh, you got eaten by a dragon. Ooh, mate. And the same thing in like Resi 4, it's like, you know, when you mess up those QTEs and stuff, it's like, they literally rip your head off and stuff, or chop your head off with chainsaws, and It's kind of like, even though you failed, it was like, oh, it makes you feel so uncomfortable that it's kind of great. And if you manage to get through the whole game without ever seeing, like if you imagine a version of Resident Evil 4 where you can get through the whole game without seeing Leon being decapitated, that would kind of ruin it in a way. Because I think it was, for me, that bit at the start, the kind of the classic bit of Resi 4 that makes it probably one of the best games ever, where you end up trapped in the house and they all come in and they put ladders up. Everyone, really, if you're playing it properly, you know, actually a lot of the more recent versions, mouse aiming and the Wii U aiming, the Wii aiming made it a bit too easy in my mind for some of the combat, but I remember playing on a GameCube pad the first time, just being terrified, and just it ending with me getting my head cut off. I was just like, what? It scared the hell out of me. It was just like, what is this game? This game is horrible. And I didn't like Resident Evil before then, but with that, it was like, Jesus, like, it's not scary, it's just intense. It's horrid. It's like, there are men trying to bloody cut you up, and they're going to do it. What a game. So yeah, I don't know. I think QTEs done right, but then at the same time, I don't like the things that have remained. I think Johan Eriksson points out in this about how it's supposed to be a kind of heart-pounding nick of time stuff, and he points out the fact that you often don't know the rules that apply, which means it kind of feels unfair, it feels cheap. I agree with that. And also, I think that so I'm getting really distracted by the fact that I can see my own hair in the little screen next to my camera. I really need a haircut. It's a good job the Patreon money for the month is coming through soon, because I need a bloody haircut. It's getting insane. Papa needs a bloody chop, as they say. But yeah, I hate the way that most games now, one of the things that they have kept from the QTE era is the hammer the button to do something. It's just tedious. It's like, fuck off. Like, as if that's like, it's supposed to mirror intensity. It's supposed to make you feel like, oh, hammer the button. But it doesn't work. Half the time, it's just like, you just end up going, oh, come on. Because it works like every now and then, but when you have to do it like regularly to finish off moves, it's just like, you end up just like looking out the window and being like, am I done with this yet? I mean, one of the few times in recent years that's worked has been at the end of slight spoiler for the Walking Dead series, but in the Walking Dead, the second episode at the end of the farm. Actually, no, this isn't really a spoiler. You're fine. At the end of the farm, there's a bit where you have to hammer a button to do something, and that worked really well because I was so wound up by that point that actually, when I was hammering that button, it was like, yes, hammer it, because it felt like cathartic. And it really kind of gained me in an interesting way emotionally, that in the fact that I was like, it made me feel like I'd really kind of inputted quite a lot of rage into the game, and then felt quite guilty about it because I felt like I'd temporarily lost a bit of my humanity. I thought that was a really, really clever implementation. But I think a lot of the time now, the problem is QTEs and these button mashing things have just become like standard game mechanics that people just put in without thinking about them, you know? They just go, we'll do it with that. And it's like, no, I think you have to have a reason. Like, you have to have, why are you doing it like that? Is there a better way you can do it? Does it need to be there? And I think that's a general game design problem when people are making any kind of game. It's just chucking mechanics in because they're in games, you know? And I think that's why it's very rare that you play games these days. I find that I just look at and go, this is a really well-crafted and well-thought-out experience, you know? And stuff like The Last of Us really impressed me for that, because it was just like, it was clever in really subtle ways that I really appreciated. Okay. There's some questions here that are related to stuff I've already talked about, such as my Twix consumption. I'm currently off the Twixes, just having a break. It's all good. Somebody talking about playing through Dark Souls 2 normally before attempting Pants Man. Yep, that's what's going to happen. Thing is, so many bloody questions. I'm still on questions from February. Whoa. I don't know how to deal with it, though. I feel like starting a new thread would be unfair to all the people who've written questions, but so far I think it'll be fine. We'll see. Paul Bannon wants to know, will we see any more cookery segments? He tried the chili with coffee in it and it was very good. That's a reference to my show The Opener on Shut Up and Sit Down. Most recently I did a pizza recipe, and before that I did sweet potato fries. Check that out. I'm not going to be doing cookery recipes on this channel because I feel like most people have funded me on Patreon to make stuff about games, which is fair enough. So I probably won't be doing cookery videos because at the moment I've not got enough time anyway. But if you want to see me doing cookery show stuff, then I would recommend watching The Opener on Shut Up and Sit Down. Even if you're not into board games, you'll probably find it quite funny, and it's got actual cookery recipes in it, which is quite fun because I'm just useless. Jack Saint, this is the last question for today, I think. Jack Saint asks, do you ever have trouble overrating games by virtue of the fact you've only played it very recently? And yeah, I think this is a classic issue. It's difficult. And basically he says he has this a lot where he sees a movie, plays a game, and then drops his internal score down a few clicks after he's thought about it a bit more. And he says, yeah, like, Bioshock Infinite comes to mind. It's a game he enjoyed a lot at launch, but doesn't look back on fondly now. Yeah, there's an interesting question here in the fact that it's like, why is it, And I think that, commonly speaking, God, it's got really dark in here. I'm going to switch lights on. The light's going to take about 5 minutes to warm up, and by that point I'll probably be done anyway. But hey, you got to try these things. Yeah, it's difficult. I think sometimes you need time to let thoughts mellow, I find often when I've played a game, I need to maybe think about it for a good 2 or 3 days before I review it. And in the past, well, when I used to review games, I used to not always have the luxury of doing that, which was frustrating, which is why often I'd write the copy and then I'd actually say, before the magazine would go to print, talking about when I used to work at OXM, I'd actually maybe just be like, can I go and change the score for that? Or can I just rewrite something? Because I'd decide I'd change my mind slightly. I think that's natural. But I also think there is a tendency when, when you've seen what other people think about games, sometimes you realize things that maybe you didn't realize were bad, you realize actually they were, or you realize you were more forgiving on things. I still think there is a degree of being kind of sure of your own convictions when you're sure. But, I don't know. I mean, it's difficult because I don't like the idea that you can play a game and then read loads of negative things about it and then find that you've somehow, in retrospect, enjoyed yourself less, even though you enjoyed yourself at the time. And it's it's a shame that happens. But it does happen, of course, because it just does. It's the way the human brain is. We do take stuff on board. And when we hear criticism of things, sometimes we don't consciously know that it's affected our overall view of it, but often it has. It's just slightly tweaked or put a seed in our head that will start to twist how we think about something. In the same way that, I always find the funny thing of, you'll have somebody who and you'll think, oh, that person's a cool person. And then somebody will tell you something about them that makes them seem quite bad, like something they've done. And you're like, oh. And you kind of internally go, well, yeah, but I still like them, so I'm going to ignore that. But then you often find that months later, that seed has grown and now, you kind of like that person less. And I think that just happens. It's just the way the human brain works. And I think it works with everything, really, in terms of how we perceive things. But, yeah, I mean, there's a degree of that with games and movies, particularly because of the fact that often there's a lot of shock and awe, There's something... games and movies are often quite explosive and impactful, and initially you just go, wow, and you just it just has that gives you a kind of rush that's just incredibly exciting, incredibly powerful, and has people just going out and immediately raving about stuff. And I think there have been games actually where you've seen across the board that's been a real impact on how games have been reviewed. I think particularly LA Noire for me sticks out, is the fact that it was a game that was so impressive initially, just because the facial technology and the sense of place and they created in terms of that LA feel and stuff. They really nailed something very cool in that game. And it reviewed so well. It was getting 9s and 10s. And that game's bollocks. It's bollocks. It's not fun. There's so many things wrong with it as a game. It's just so frustrating. Phelps is just a fucking muppet who you've got 3 options that are well vague in terms of what you've got to do. And you never know what he's going to say, and he often says completely different things to what you expect. And you've got the whole of LA to drive around in, but it's mostly empty, and it's a kind of a shit game. But it reviewed so well, and it's because when I initially started playing it as well, I had the same thing. I've just been like, oh, this is amazing. You want to love it so much because there's so much cool stuff about it. Seeing cameos from Mad Men, it's just it's fucking cool. But then the more time you spend with it, the more time you think about it, you kind of go, this is kind of bollocks. And it's a sort of game that reviewed incredibly well, I suspect because of the way that it was probably given to press not very long before the embargo. Press played it quickly, and I don't know. I mean, I think that has happened, Sometimes it's shock and awe. And that's why I guess the difficulty with reviews is the only way to look at them as being a kind of a representation of time and place, of being this was what this person thought at this point in time. And the difficulty with that is sometimes things burn out slowly. Like a lot of games which are deemed to be classics 5 years ago are now a bit of a mess. However, some things burn out very quickly. And I think LA Noire is a game that just, for me, I went from thinking it was really cool to thinking it was pretty crap in the space of about a week, I think. So it didn't age well. And I suspect that LA Noire is a game that if we go and play it now or in 2 years, it's going to be like, this is trash, you know? It's just, in the same way that FMV games used to really impress people because it had real videos of real people, but then actually once you get over the kind of technical novelty of them, they're not very good. And I think that that's really the case with that one. Whereas other stuff is more timeless. You know, stuff like Red Dead, I think, is going to be a game that will be, it will weather time better. But anyway, that's about it for the questions this week. It's enough for the Q&A because I'm getting bloody knackered. Talking is exhausting. I'm tired, darling. How was it for you? I hope it was pleasant. I haven't spilled any more tea on my cock, but my tea has gone cold, which means the tea timer is up. Well, thank you very much for watching or listening, and see you next week. Bye.